What if I told you the guy who built Whitesnake's biggest album got kicked out before the first tour and spent the rest of his life chasing that betrayal? John Sykes formed Blue Murder to burn the world down, but instead the world turned cold and the band ate itself from the inside out. Here's how one of rock's greatest hard rock debuts of all time died in silence.
Like, subscribe. Thank you.
Blue Murder didn't start with ambition. It started with a knife in the back. In 1987, John Sykes was riding high. He had just torched his way through every riff and solo in Whitesnake, an album about to blow up into an 8-time platinum juggernaut. He didn't just play on it, he built it. The new sound, the bite, the weight, that was John Sykes. And he was supposed to ride that wave straight to the guitar legend status. Instead, Coverdale cut him loose, just like that, right before the release. No warning or second chances, he was just gone. And the band that made the record, totally wiped out. Coverdale wanted a new look, a new lineup, a band that hadn't bled for those songs. And to this day, it still smells like betrayal. And it lit the fuse for something new, meaner, and definitely much more personal. Sykes didn't sulk, he was seething. He holed up in Blackpool, staring out at the cold sea and plotting revenge with a guitar in his lap. This wasn't going to be a rebound band, this was war. He didn't want to move on, he wanted to outdo, blow past Whitesnake, bury Coverdale, make something so undeniable it would make the betrayal look like a gift. And he had said, I wanted to get a great band and get out there and basically give a bit of a middle finger. And he meant every word of it. So John Sykes, well, he starts writing like a man possessed. The riffs came in heavy, technical, scarred with spite. The solos were burning. And with this, there'd be no label puppeteering or compromise, no second guessing for sure. Sykes was at the wheel, all in. And he put together one hell of a crack group of musicians. Cozy Powell on the drums. Dude was a friggin' thunder god behind the kit. And definitely already battle-tested from their Whitesnake days. Then you got Tony Franklin on the bass, fresh from the firm. Dude could wield a fretless like nobody's business. And he's one of the few who could really dance through those complex grooves without breaking a sweat. Less of a band and more of a friggin' hit squad. And to round it out, they brought in Ray Gillen, who some of you would know had gone on to sing for Badlands, Jakey Lee's band. That dude had the voice. Big, soulful, straight out of Sabbath. The kind of frontman who could go toe-to-toe with Coverdale and come out grinning. On paper, it was perfect. A real deal supergroup. The Revenge Machine was fully assembled. Unfortunately, however, it didn't take long for the seams to show. Before a single record even hit the shelves, the cracks started splitting wide open. Enter John Callonder, Geffen's A&R kingmaker. The guy in the white suit who could anoint or annihilate a career with a single phone call. And when he heard those early demos, he dropped a bomb. He liked Sykes' scratch vocals better than Gillen's finished takes. And that was it. Tensions that were already simmering between Sykes and Gillen over direction and delivery blew wide open. Ray Gillen didn't stand a chance, and he was gone within a few months. And then came Cozy Powell. Dude was brilliant and explosive, but allergic to waiting around. The sessions were slow, really precise, and very agonizing. And Powell just wanted to move. You know, he didn't want to sit around idly by. He wanted to just get out there. And by early 88, he bailed, back to Black Sabbath, where at least the chaos was productive. And just like that, the dream lineup was total dust. And just when the whole thing looked ready to collapse into nothing, fate threw in a lifeline. Carmen Appice, drum royalty, loud as hell, big personality, huge chops. He caught wind that Cozy was out, and he didn't even wait for an invite. He just went hunting. Carmen later said, I heard Cozy quit, so I just tracked John down. And he did. Called Sykes directly. Pitched himself hard. And John Sykes liked the sound of it and told him to get on a plane. So Appice flew to England, headed straight for Blackpool. No time wasted. And what he walked into was not a rehearsal room. It was a pressure cooker. Sykes and Franklin were there. Raw nerves, sleepless eyes, wrists flying around like shrapnel. There was a creative storm going on, but something else in the air too. Something a lot heavier. Something unspoken. The band wasn't dead yet, but it sure as hell wasn't normal. So Appice went on to say that they went on, smoked some hash. They played him a bunch of stuff they were working on. And so he just put the drums on it, and the sound was like magic. It just fit perfectly. And it did. The groove snapped perfectly into place. Franklin's fluid bass lines wrapped around Appice's pounding rhythms, sounded like they were born together. Sykes' guitar, aggressive and sharp and surgical, cut through it all like a blade. And heck, they'd even tried out Ainsley Dunbar, who was another heavyweight, fresh off of Journey and Whitesnake, but the spark just wasn't there. It was Appice who had it. And before they had really decided to go the way they went, After Ray Gillen was gone, that mic was empty. And in early 88, they tried again with Tony Martin, who was also in Black Sabbath for a time. Strong pipes and solid pedigree, but the curse hadn't lifted yet. But Tony Martin was locked and loaded, ready to fly to Vancouver and cut the album. Then just like that, he just ghosted him, pulled out at the last second. So the revolving door had spun around one more time, and now the band was out of options. And that's when Colander stepped in again. He heard enough demos and scratch takes. With Appice and Franklin backing him, he just said, Sykes, do it, man. No more delays. And John Sykes was not totally into it. He was a guitar player, not a frontman. Not in his eyes, anyways. No training, no ego trip. But he wasn't flying blind. He learned from Titans, Phil Lynott, from Thin Lizzy, David Coverdale, of course. He had studied under fire. And so when the pressure came down from Colander and his own bandmates, he just gave in, took the mic. And with the final lineup set up, Sykes on vocals and guitar, Franklin on bass, Appice on drums, they just needed a name. That's when Franklin dropped it. Blue Murder, pulled from the British phrase to scream blue murder, a perfect fit for a band born out of betrayal. And in early 88, the final three, Sykes, Franklin, Appice, walked into Little Mountain Sound in Vancouver with Bob Rock at the helm. And their mission? Make a record that screamed blood and thunder. And for Sykes, this was more than a debut, it was actually a tribute. He dedicated the album to Phil Lynott, his mentor and friend and former bandmate. Lynott's shadow hung over everything. His attitude, his grit baked into every note. Sessions were pretty wild, tight tracking by day, going nuts and partying by night. Carmen Appice summed it best when he talked about cutting Jelly Roll, the bluesy, drunken brawler of a track. Said we're partying with some strippers, all bonked out of our minds, and at some point, he stumbled into the live room, still loaded, and hit record. Next morning, pounding hangover, he braced himself and then hit play, and it sounded great, so we kept it. That was the vibe. No second takes unless the first one just really sucked. And the chaos? It wasn't a distraction, it was part of the mix. And you could hear it bleeding through every groove. So the debut album, Blue Murder, dropped on April 24th, 1989, and hit like a tank with a jazz degree. It was massive, layered, smart. Every track was a musical flex. From the opening explosion of Riot with its eastern twists and thunderous stomp, to the brooding sprawl of Valley of the Kings, to the aching beauty of Out of Love, it was clear that it wasn't just a revenge product. It stood on its own. And Bob Rock's production hit like granite. Critics took notice. The record got called everything from a masterpiece to one of the finest records in an age. Brains, balls, and tone for days. And even years later, the album still holds its ground. Total underground classic for the freaks who know what greatness sounds like when it bleeds. Now the record, it might have roared, but the sales barely growled. In the UK, Blue Murder crept up to number 45. In the US, it stalled at number 69 on the Billboard 200. Respectable for some, but for a band stacked with these legends and backed by Geffen, it was considered a pretty sucky turnout. Sykes later claimed that they moved about 500,000 units worldwide. Appice, he was less generous, said the US number hovered around 150,000. Either way, it missed the mark, badly. The expectation was arena-filling, multi-platinum mayhem, and what they got was more like a shrug. And that's where the post-mortem began. The great MTV debate. The blame game. Everybody had a theory. Pointing fingers. And under it all was that creeping, familiar feeling that this band, like so many others, born in fire, might already be cursed. Geffen's plan was smart at first. Drop Valley of the Kings as a promo single to stir the waters and flex the band's epic side in order to get that rock crowd salivating. The video was massive. Directed by Pet Sematari's Mary Lambert, loaded with mysticism and fire. MTV even spotlighted it as their hip clip of the week. The follow-up move was supposed to be the kill shot. Released Jelly Roll, the swaggering blues-drenched, radio-ready banger as the real single. That was the plan. But then the band got high in their own mythology. On tour, they pushed Valley as the main event. 7 minutes, Eastern motifs, complex structure, no real chorus. Not exactly MTV's wet dream. And Carmen Appice would later say that it was just a friggin' dumb mistake. It was never built for a radio. And to pour salt in the wound, the single wasn't even available in stores. No way to buy it, no way to chart it. Tony Franklin called that out. It was sabotaged by incompetence. Any shot at real momentum was just gone. And by the time Jelly Roll finally dropped as the second single, it should have been their redemption arc. Because that track's got teeth and hooks and swagger, that dirty groove tailor-made for radio. And it worked there, climbing to number 15 on the album Rock Tracks chart But the real battleground was MTV, and that door had already slammed shut. According to Tony Franklin, MTV wouldn't even touch the video. They pointed to Valley of the Kings as the failure and used it as the excuse. No rotation or spotlight, so it just had no shot. And in the late 80s, that was pretty much the death knell. MTV was everything. Not just exposure, actual survival. Without it, you didn't cross over. You did not go platinum back then. You did not matter. Jelly Roll could have launched them, but instead it got buried alive. And this is really where it gets murky. Sykes and Franklin say MTV iced them out, but fans online totally told a different story. There were many sightings of Jelly Roll on MTV. Headbangers Ball, Dial MTV, and Billboard data actually backs it up. Jelly Roll hit MTV's breakouts list in late summer of '89. It was played, so what gives? Well, the truth lives in the cracks. As insiders have pointed out, landing on specialty shows like Dial MTV or Headbangers Ball wasn't the same as breaking into the sacred daytime rotation. That was the real battlefield. Those core hours, the lunch crowd, the after-school kids, that's where the hits were made. That's where the money lived. Jelly Roll got airtime, certainly, but it didn't get enough. And in that ruthless era, almost meant nothing. Then came the finger pointing. John Sykes said that the label really did not get behind them at all. And according to him, the label was hedging their bets, waiting on a Whitesnake reunion, hoping that he and Coverdale would kiss and make up. Carmen Appice had said that the whole thing was botched from the inside. The original management, 3 people including Sykes' stepdad, got canned right before the tour. By the time a real manager stepped in, the window had already slammed shut. And Sykes would later own a piece of it as well by saying that maybe the album was too heavy or too complex, not really built for radio. No obvious hit. And even the A&R person, John Callender, the architect of this whole mad plan, eventually backpedaled. He had forced Sykes behind the mic, but years later admitted that the guy didn't have the voice or the stage presence to carry the thing over the top. And a lot of us are going to disagree with that, at least when it came to the voice. But still, you had untethered frontmen all over the place at that time, and this band did not have that. He was wielding a guitar as well. So just when Blue Murder thought they'd weather the storm, internal mutiny, label apathy, the MTV screw job, something even bigger started crawling in from the shadows. You guessed it, flannel. The Pacific Northwest was about to rewrite the rules. Nirvana hit like a pipe bomb in a perfume shop. Never mind top charts and gutted the old guard. Tony Franklin later put it that it changed the music business completely on its head. And that wasn't an exaggeration. I've done enough of these videos covering bands from this period, and more times than not, it points right back to grunge taking over. And Blue Murder's brand of high gloss, high skill hard rock, totally out of vogue by that time. It didn't matter how tight they were. And the flop just crushed Sykes. All that rage, precision, ambition, gone in a puff of bad timing and industry indifference. He spiraled inward, totally disillusioned, bitter. Instead of regrouping, he kind of retreated. Progress on the second album slowed to a crawl. He decided to self-produce, built a new home studio, chasing perfection like a ghost. But the world was spinning and Blue Murder was basically standing still. So for guys like Carmen Appice and Tony Franklin, pros who lived on the road, not in waiting rooms, it got pretty bad. Carmen said, "Hey man, I gotta go out and make some money. I can't just sit around here." And that was it. He was out by December of '90. Franklin hung around a little longer, but not much. August of '91, he was gone too. Classic Blue Murder lineup, dead in the water. But Sykes, he wasn't done yet. He pieced together a new version of Blue Murder with bassist Marco Mendoza and drummer Tommy Osteen, dragging the name forward through sheer will. But in a weird full circle twist, both Appice and Franklin got pulled back in. This time not as bandmates, but as hired guns, session players. They laid down parts for the second record. And that record, Nothing But Trouble, finally dropped in August of '93. 4 years late and a full cultural shift too late. Grunge was king by this time, and anything with big solos or slick production might as well come with a do not play sticker. Critics gave it a little nod, solid, nothing spectacular, but the magic was gone. The audience had already turned the page, and that album landed with barely a ripple. Commercially, DOA. Nothing But Trouble didn't just underperform, it vanished. Outside of Japan, where Sykes still had loyal diehards, the album failed to chart anywhere. And Sykes, he turned around and said Geffen did not do a damn thing to push the record. No ads, tour muscle, nothing. And in 1994, one last gasp hit the shelves, Screaming Blue Murder, dedicated to Phil Lynott, and a live album to fulfill the fine print. There was no tour, no farewell, just a contract clause checked off. And after that, Geffen dropped them, quietly and cleanly. But then something strange happened. The world forgot Blue Murder and then slowly started remembering. Not so much in the charts or the headlines, but in whispers and bootlegs, basement speakers. That debut album, once brushed aside, started getting passed around like the sacred contraband. Musicians studied it, fans obsessed over it. The production, the playing, the feel, it aged really well. Miles Kennedy called it a cornerstone, and others followed it, and it became a cult classic. And that rising legacy actually sparked hope. From 2000 to 2012, Carmen Appice tried more than once to put the original lineup back together. He'd push and call and float offers, but nothing stuck. No one could align the egos, the schedules, the old wounds. But in 2019, the stars finally aligned. Almost. Sykes, Appice, and Franklin got in a room, rehearsed, plugged in for the first time in decades. Blue Murder was breathing again. Hopes were sky high, and the fire was still burning, it seemed like. But then it all fell apart again. The fight? Same as always, control. Sykes wanted to bill it as John Sykes and Blue Murder. Appice and Franklin were not having it. To them, it was a band, not a vanity project. The name belonged to all of them or none of them. Franklin later said it all came down to Sykes being stuck in the past, locked into a version of the business that really just didn't exist anymore. Labels in charge, one guy at the top, everybody just kind of going with what they wanted and everything flowing downward. But in the new world, that did not fly. And just like that, the reunion was dead. And after the 2019 implosion, Sykes faded into the shadows. No tours or press. The industry had worn him down. Betrayal, indifference, red tape, endless compromises. He'd show flashes now and then, tease a solo track or drop a rumor, but mostly he stayed out of reach. And then came the final gut punch, something I covered in depth that very day. On January 20th, 2025, the news broke John Sykes had died of cancer the month before. He was 65. No fanfare or grand send-off, just a quiet exit of one of the most gifted and maybe one of the most misunderstood guitar players of his time. And the news hit hard. The man who rewired Whitesnake, the architect of Blue Murder, a player whose tone and feel shaped a generation, just gone. And the band he built from pain and fury, that legacy carved out of exile and riffs, closed forever. No redemption arc, just the music, the myth, and that mess left behind. Blue Murder was built for glory, but then swallowed by fate. It's the kind of story that keeps happening in rock and roll, but barely with this much talent, this much promise, and this much wreckage. They had the songs and the chops and the look. They had John Sykes angry and inspired, ready to prove the world wrong, but ego got loud, and of course the industry got really cold. So Blue Murder may have never gotten their platinum run, but those who know. That debut, untouchable. Masterpiece that for one white-hot moment, Blue Murder had it in their hands. And then just like that, it was gone. The thunder never caught up.